few buttons. Okay, welcome everybody. This is our continuation of Ask the Building Expert series, and thanks for tuning in, whether you're on our Zoom platform or on Facebook Live. Today is International Chocolate Day, so Martin, who's actually the co-host, he actually turned his video off because he's eating some chocolate now for International Chocolate Day. But anyway, I guess it goes good with his coffee or tea. But why do we do these webinars? Well, it's interesting because we had this idea that we wanted to provide information to building owners, property managers, homeowners, and anybody who's in the industry, contractors, real estate developers, attorneys, architects, and whoever is interested in a topic. And by the way, some of the topics that we talk about are actually requested by people who've been on our webinars before and they're interested in the information. So keep it coming. We have not formulated our schedule for next year yet. So if you want to get a chance to give us some ideas on topics in the future for next year, we'll be happy to consider those. So just email or call us and let us know what's going on. Today's topic is hazardous building materials, and be aware. Now, hazardous building materials is a little different from defective building materials, although it could be similar. Hazardous building materials, if people get exposed to it, they can get really sick or even die. And I know it's kind of morbid, but as opposed to defective building material, where the material in itself is defective, and let's say siding, wood siding would be defective, and it'll rot out and you replace it. So you're not gonna get sick or die from it unless there's mold growing on it and you start breathing the mold spores. But the basis of the term hazardous building material is the material is hazardous. And let's talk about the definition. And basically, it's building materials that pose a health hazard, a physical hazard, or a hazard to the environment. And in a nutshell, that's what the definition of hazardous building materials mean. And so you might say, well, give us some examples of what you're talking about. And we're going to do that. But before that, there's governmental agencies that actually govern, or they have jurisdiction over hazardous building materials. And those entities are the EPA, Health Department, the U.S. Health Department. There's also state health departments. If you're tuning in from other states in the United States, each state has their own separate health department. And so those are guidelines also that they have to regulate the building materials. There's also other entities, other government entities, which has their own governmental regulations, and some are similar and some crossover and some are totally separate. There's a CDC, and people didn't pay attention too much to CDC until the pandemic came. And it's like, whoa, that's the agency that supposedly provides national information for everybody to follow. And they have their own problems, but we're not going to go into that. There's actually OSHA, Occupational Safety Hazard Agency, and in the state of Hawaii, it's HIOSH. H stands for Hawaii. And you all know what OSHA is. They mainly regulate employees doing construction or repair and maintenance work. And they're also involved. There's also the GSA, Government Services Agency. And there's also HUD, housing, urban uh, development, and there's a whole bunch of other organizations. And the more research that's being done, the more you find out there's kind of a web of different organizations. But for the purpose of the topic today, we're not really going to talk about regulations. We're mainly going to talk about the materials itself. So let's go right into the materials. Now, everyone has heard of lead paint and asbestos. It's hazard building materials. So the lead paint, as you know, was a building material that was used for years and years, and even asbestos. At the time that buildings were using these products, lead paint, well, it was paint, but people really didn't know about the hazard of lead, and even the hazards of the asbestos, for that matter. So up until 1977, 78, the EPA stepped in and regulated more heavily, and they said everybody, you can't use these materials anymore. Okay, so that kind of put a stop to buildings that were constructed using lead paint and asbestos. But the question is, well, what about all those buildings that already were constructed and they have lead paint and asbestos? Now, that's the key question. So we have to watch out for that. And lead paint, as you know, and it affects children mostly. And what happens is, if you look at the image on the left, you see flaking and chipped paint on a windowsill, and this is how children get affected. The chip paint ends up falling on the ground, and small kids have a tendency, to play around the yard, and the paint chips are in the soil, mixed in the soil, and little kids have a tendency to put their fingers in their mouth and all that. So what happens is they're actually ingesting little particles of the paint from these small chips. Now, in a situation where you have somebody sanding the paint and that has lead in, now what happens is the lead gets in the air, and then people breathe it. And when lead enters a human body, it's not like orange juice, which goes away. It stays in your body. Okay, and that's that's what lead poisoning is all about. So for children, they get hit the most. They get affected the most. They suffer really dangerously from lead poisoning, and it's from the lead paint. Now, talking about asbestos, asbestos is a fibrous material that's actually from nature. It's from the earth, and they figured out that these fibers, when they mix it in building products, it actually protects from a fire. So it was like, wow, this is the best material, space age material. And if you build your house and it has asbestos in the drywall, it'll prevent a fire and all that. But little did they know, the asbestos itself was very dangerous, and it has these minute fibers that you can only see under a micron microscope. It's an electronic microscope that magnifies thousands of times, and that's the only way you can detect asbestos, even lead paint too. So a person cannot just go and look at paint and drywall or popcorn ceiling and go, oh yeah, that's asbestos. They don't have the ability. The only way to really confirmly tell if it's hazardous is through testing at a laboratory. Okay, so uh, if somebody just says, well, that's what it is, well, you don't know for sure. But you could say that if the building was built prior to 1977, 78, and when I say building, it could be a condo building, office building, shopping center, or your own house or an apartment building. Um, you could say that chances are it probably has these hazardous materials, but the only way to know for sure is to have it tested. Now, asbestos was used in pipe lining, and they call it pipe lagging, where it's insulation around pipes like water heater pipes. I inspected a hospital in San Francisco. Was old. The hospital was built in the 50s. Down in the basement, all their hot water pipes were insulated with pipe lagging, and the wrap, the material was asbestos containing. And even there's asbestos in drywall, there's asbestos in flooring material, flooring mastic, the drywall mud, the tape joint mud. There could be asbestos in window caulking, in roofing material, and different other building materials that could be containing that product. So that's what lead paint and asbestos, and that's probably the two main building materials that are hazardous. There's a whole bunch of other chemicals that are used in building material, but these are the common ones, and I'm familiar with these ones the most, so that's why I'm talking about it. And I actually handled lead paint and asbestos and other kind of building materials like chlordane that's used for termite treatment, but it's banned because it was dangerous. So if you see me somewhere at night and I'm going in the dark, that's because of my history handling these kinds of materials. So here's a picture of lead paint. How do we know it's lead? Because it was tested, and as you can see, it's just not adhering to the substrate, and it can be easily chipped off. If you hit it, pieces are going to chip off and go to the ground. Now, you can't just leave it on the ground. There's special abatement methods, like by law, it's hazardous abatement. So you need to hire a licensed hazardous abatement contractor or abatement contractor that deals with lead paint removal and asbestos removal and that kind of thing. And I'll throw in mold. It's kind of like the same category. So you might see a caution sign: caution, asbestos, hazardous, do not disturb without proper training and equipment. Okay, and if you look at the other image, the person is scraping the popcorn ceiling. Some people, like, popcorn ceiling was used a lot in the 70s, especially on condo buildings and apartment buildings. And it was asbestos containing. And people didn't like the look, or they don't want the asbestos, so they scrape it off. But if you're going to scrape it off yourself, that's kind of a no-no. You have to hire a licensed contractor that has the training, has the equipment. If you scrape it yourself, you're the one that's breathing all these fibers, so it becomes dangerous. The other thing is that if you don't know how to do it, then the proper way is to spray it with water so it's wet, and then it's easier to scrape off. But I'm just telling you that's the protocol. I'm not telling you that so you can do it on your own, do it yourself. Now let's talk about concrete and drywall. You might say, well, I already mentioned about drywall, how there could be asbestos in the drywall, but what about concrete? Is there asbestos in the concrete? Well, in the early days, there could have been, but in more modern days, there's no asbestos in the concrete. So you might ask, well, what's the problem? What's the hazard, with the concrete? Well, as you know, concrete is a mixture of cement, limestone aggregate, which is gravel, water, and sand. And the cement mixture, if you breathe that, that's kind of hazardous. But try not to do that. But when you're mixing, when a contractor's mixing concrete, they have to be very careful. Now, let's say the building's already built, okay, but there's concrete spalling, there's cracks, there's pieces of concrete that are separating, and you need to hire a concrete contractor to do the spalling repair. Now, when the contractor comes to the building and they start jackhammering away the bad concrete, or grinding it down, or sanding it to make it smooth, or some other work that releases concrete dust, that is very dangerous to breathe. Okay, it's sort of like if you're breathing the asbestos fibers, the concrete in the air, okay, those little particles, and it looks like dust, right? But it has this silica, which is dangerous to breathe. That's why more recently, the EPA and other health departments got together, and now they came up, and even OSHA came up with standards now for concrete repair and mitigation, where years ago, they never had that. Okay, so like 20 years ago, there was no protocol for grinding concrete and being aware of the dust in the air, but now there is, right? There's special PPP that you have to wear and all that. So just be aware of that. Now, if you look at the image on the right, that's of the Florida building that collapsed about a year or two ago. And when it collapsed, there's like tons of concrete that made all this concrete dust. So, the first responders, they can't just go to the site and try to look for people to rescue without having hard hats and their full PPE, respirators and all that. Because what happens is they go to the site and they're breathing all this hazardous dust and materials. Okay, so which leads me to talking about 9/11. Okay, and the reason I'm bringing 9/11 up is because when the buildings fell, the two towers, and I've been to the site many years later in New York. They have you probably been there too, maybe, but there's One World Trade Center, which is built in the same area, but it's basically cleaned up now. But when the incident happened, there was an estimated 400 tons of pulverized asbestos, concrete, and fiberglass, and all that. And it created this huge plume in the air. And it wasn't just from the smoke, from the fire. It was all these particles of building material, concrete, fiberglass, and all that. So if you took a sample of the air that could have been 400, 600 feet high, and analyzed it in laboratory, you would see pieces of concrete, fiberglass, smoke, and all that stuff. So that's why there's this huge conflict now in New York, in Manhattan, where the city did not release all the information on the health aspects of the incident, the event. Okay, so there's probably going to be big lawsuits now. And there's been speculation that the city of New York is withholding information because they don't want to get involved in people saying that they didn't do what they should have done, which is the right thing, which is more to protect not only the first responders but everyone else. the people who were bystanders that ended up breathing uh, the smoke and the plume and all that, they have health problems, or they're subject to health problems. And historically, there's documentation already, and it's pretty bad. So if you're interested, there's a lot of information online that you can get. But just letting you know information. So I talked about concrete. Um, if you're saw cutting, like this worker is saw cutting concrete, right? And I guess he's saw cutting it because there are probably cracks or spalling repair. He's saw cutting it to, repair the area, damaged area with new concrete. But look at the smoke, the dust, okay, in the back of him. He's creating a health hazard. And I don't see him wearing any kind of respirator or even like you know, a COVID mask or anything. Okay, so this is an OSHA violation, but I'm not here to tell you about OSHA violation. But the grinding, the chipping, or the saw cutting that creates uh, the dust. Okay, the dust is called crystalline silica, and it gets released in the air, and it's very hazardous to breathe. Okay, so not only for the construction workers, but let's say there's a condo building he's working on that's either in the area or nearby, across the street or whatever. If there's a slight wind, and it'll blow the dust into your unit, or you're walking on the street and you're breathing the dust. Sometimes when the dust settles, it dissipates. You can't see the dust, but it's still in the air, right? It's sort of like if someone smokes. Eventually, the smoke from the cigarette will dissipate, but there's still hazardous, toxic, minute chemicals that are still in the air that you're going to breathe. So remember the crystalline silica. That's the people say that's the next asbestos, and I've been talking to a lot of people in construction and even in the medical field, and everyone's saying that's the next asbestos hazard, the crystalline silica. And it's interesting. In my line of work, I do a lot of building and construction repairs and maintenance, and I never thought I would like go into getting involved in health and medical concerns, but it just kind of goes hand in hand. So it's like you can't get away from it. And then also, I have about 10 OSHA certifications, and some of them have to do with health hazards and all that. So that's very important on construction sites. Drywall is, I mentioned drywall dust is actually hazardous. So even if there's no asbestos in the drywall dust, you don't want to be sanding drywall and start breathing the dust. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and common sense would dictate that if it's not clean air, you don't want to be breathing that stuff. So if you're in a construction site or an area where they're doing sanding on the drywall to prep it for painting, you don't want to be in that area. Or if you are, please wear a mask. And I'm not talking about only outside the building. If you're renovating your apartment or your condo unit or your house, and you're walking inside your house, and there's dust all around from the drywall, that's not too safe. Okay, so let's say you're in your unit, and you have a broken pipe, and the contractor got to come and cut the drywall out to get to the pipe. When he's cutting the drywall out, is there dust? When someone's patching the drywall and they have to sand it, is there dust created? You want to make sure that they use a vacuum and wet mop, and the vacuum cleaner to use is a HEPA, HEPA, And that's what the machine they use to vacuum asbestos too, because it has their filter that's really made to handle small fibers and small particles in the air, like 99.9% they can capture it. All right, so let's talk about mold. Well, mold is not really a hazardous building material. Like you don't go to the hardware store or Home Depot or City Mill and buy a product that has mold in it, or hopefully that doesn't happen. Mold actually occurs after the building's built and it was subject to some kind of water or moisture uh, and it would create damage. So the reason I'm bringing this up is I consider mold hazardous, and when it's on a building material, then it's a hazardous building material, but it's not like manufactured like lead paint and asbestos at the time. Okay, so mold is a little different. And the mold I'm talking about is not like you have a loaf of bread and you leave it out on your counter, you know, for several days, and all of a sudden you see mold growing on your nice white bread, or hopefully, you know, you're more health conscious and you're eating whole wheat bread. Okay, but let's say it's a white bread, and now you look and there's like green and brownish particles in your bread and stuff, and that's not the mold I'm talking about. Okay, the mold I'm talking about is more hazardous, and it grows on cellulose material. It grows on drywall. Why does it grow on drywall and wallpaper? It's because the drywall has paper on it. The drywall is actually a building material, you know, like you know, chalk, for example, limestone kind of material, and it's wedged, sandwiched in between paper. Okay, that's what drywall is. So mold is growing on the paper. If you have pieces of wood, plywood and all that, it gets wet. Because it's cellulose, it's from a tree, and paper's from a tree too, mold starts growing on the cellulose materials. And there's different variations of mold. The more toxic ones are the worst. And what causes, you know, health problems is people are breathing the mold spores and getting asthma, they're getting all kind of other ailments, and you have to go, you know, seek medical attention. Okay, and because there's different varieties of mold, in order to determine whether the mold is like really hazardous or dangerous, the hazmat contractor got to come in, or environmental person, take samples, send it to a lab, and then you get the result. And it might say, oh, it's you know, not that bad, or it's Stachybotrys mold. They call it Stachy, which is like the almost the worst type of mold you have. And I've seen that before. I've been in many buildings that had lead, asbestos, and even mold, and it's not a good situation. So as soon as you have a leak somewhere or water, you want to mitigate the problem, stop the leak, and then, you know, stop the mold from growing. Okay, that's the main thing. Now let's talk about some case studies. And these are all situations that I've been personally involved in, so I can tell you it's not some study I got from the internet. So, and these situations were all in Hawaii. One, you had a high-rise condo, and there was a roof leak, and they never fixed the roof leak. And so the person who lived in the penthouse unit was suffering already because they had a pre-existing medical condition, but it made it worse. The condition got exacerbated because now you have asbestos maybe released in the air or getting damaged because of water damaging the drywall or the popcorn ceiling. And then now there's mold growing on the drywall. So it's a double whammy. You have asbestos in the drywall and now you have mold. Okay, so that's one situation. Another situation is, and I can tell you there's probably 50 condo units, townhouses and high-rise condo units that I have seen, actually walked in where they had mold growing in the units because of a water leak. And it could have been a window leak, it could have been a roof leak, or the majority of them were plumbing leaks. In the subject unit, a pipe broke, or the unit next door or the unit above. Okay, they had a plumbing leak. Most of them were not freshwater leaks. They were cast iron pipe leaks. The pipe cracked, it got too old, or the fitting came loose or something. And you have wastewater now going into the unit or many units down below. So the problem here is that if the building was older building, now you have contaminated, you have water damage, asbestos in the drywall or ceiling. Then you have mold growing, and then you have wastewater to deal with. So it's pretty toxic. So you would want to get these things cleaned up right away and not have to contend with it. Okay, so these are case studies, and my recommendation is, as soon as there's a leak, you got to tend to it right away, because in 48 hours, mold starts growing. Mold is just waiting to grow. If you don't have anything to take care of the water, dry it out and all that. And then what happens if you have a double wall? The mold is growing inside the wall. You might not even be able to see it. I've had situations where the person in the unit was getting sick, and they had like 10 different people going into the unit looking, property manager, a contractor, and they go, oh, I don't see any mold. I don't know why that person's sick. Maybe they're a hypochondriac. Maybe they're making this stuff up. Maybe they're trying to get free attention or free medical or whatever. And they go to the doctor, and the doctor can't find the cause, but they diagnose it as, yeah, you have a asthma condition, bronchitis, or any kind of lung-related problem, okay, or breathing problem. And then I got the call. They said, you know what, we can't figure out what's going on. And people said to call you because you're the expert. And so I said, that's fine. So I go and look at the unit, and I don't see any mold. But then I asked the historical data, when did your water event happen? What did you do about it? Did they cut any walls open or anything? And they go, oh, no, they just came in and brought in fans and mopped up a little and dried it out. And when they came with moisture meters, they dried everything out. They said, oh, everything's good to go now. We're going to close the case. And how can you close a case when they didn't do their extensive evaluation? And I said, well, they didn't cut any of the wall. I said, okay, here's what you got to do. You got to call the remediation contractor, do air sample tests, do bulk sample tests, cut open the drywall, do tests inside the drywall. And then you know what? The results came that there was mold in the unit. There was mold growing in the drywall, in the double wall, and you couldn't see it. So they cut it out, and I took a picture of the back of the drywall, and there was all green and black stuff growing on it. That's mold. So mold was growing in the wall for like over a month, 2 months, 3 months. And the person that was in the unit kept getting sick and going to the doctor. And everyone says, you're a hypochondriac. So what I'm trying to say is that just because the remediation contract and everyone says that it's all good, it may not be all good. So you almost have to demand more be done. And, you know, sometimes the insurance company would say, no, we don't want to pay extra, but you have to force your hand. I'm working on some cases now, litigation cases where I'm the expert, and um, we're not in agreement. Our side is not in agreement with what the condo board says, what their contractor says, what their insurance company is saying. Okay, so just be aware of that. So basically, conclusion, I kind of mentioned already, but anytime you have water damage, be aware and do something about it. Also, be aware, you want to ask the question, when was my house built? When was my condo built? Do I have lead paint or asbestos? Even if you don't have it in your unit, if you're a condo unit owner or property manager, what happens if there's lead paint or asbestos on the outside of your building? And now there's work being done, maybe concrete spalling, or you're recaulking your window frames or whatever. And it's good to know that stuff, right? So it's not like before where whatever, just go and fix our building. No one's asking the question about, oh, should we be concerned about any kind of environmental hazard? Should we be aware of lead paint, asbestos? Oh, no, that's just going to cost extra money. Just go ahead and do whatever you need to do to fix the building and then let us know when you're done. That's not the right way to do things, folks. Okay, so I think I missed a couple of things, but let me, oh, I know what. Before we get to the Q&A, and I put this down, you got questions, I got answers. I'm willing to answer whatever question you have, even if it's off topic a little, and I'm game. And if I don't know the answer, I'll let you know, and I'll say, well, let me do some research, or I can point you in the right direction. I don't, on purpose, I don't say that I'm a know-it-all, but I do know a bunch of stuff. But what's coming up in the future, other webinars, and you know, this is a little commercial here. We have continuation of our Ask the Building Expert series. We have special inspection, code requirements, and a lot of it has to do with new construction, but also it's also pertaining to renovation work and all that. And it applies to single family houses and condos and any kind of other buildings. After that, we have construction inspection. How important is it? I'll be talking about who's inspecting, who's qualified, why do you need to have it done, and all that. And then next, problems in the construction industry. I'll be talking about increases in costs, supply chain issues, labor problems, and all that. And then also, the last one is defective building materials. And defective building materials, I'm going to be talking about siding, roofing, other materials that are defective. You know, when you buy it brand new, it's already a defective material. Over time, you're going to see the material crumbling, cracking, and all that prematurely. And then before I get to the Q&A, and Martin is going to be checking the questions and all that. For those of you who are on this webinar or attending or have attended our webinars in the past, I'm working on 2 books right now, and they're going to be ebooks, and the topic is how safe is your building? And the other one is monster houses. And the monster houses are specific to Hawaii, to Oahu. And I'm telling it's a tell-all basically. So the houses, I think there's about 9 or 10 or something like that. The owners of those properties, the developers that got cited by DPP for building code violations, the actual violations, copies of the violation notices and all that are going to be in the book. And So far, I'm up to 360 pages, and I think I got one more house that I want to include in Kalihi, and then I'm done. Now, there's probably more monster houses that are out there, but it's not going to be in the book because I had to cut it off. Otherwise, my book would never get finished. So, if you already emailed me that you wanted a copy of the building safety book, I have you on the list, but that's okay. You can email again as a reminder, and um, maybe in 2 to 3 months, the 2 books should be completed. Uh, so get your name on the list if you want. It's going to be a online ebook initially. I haven't decided whether I'm going to print copies, paperback and all that yet. So depends, how much money Martin and I make from these webinars will give us the seed money in order to fund the printing costs. Oh, I just got a text from Martin that we're not charging for the webinar. Okay, well, that's not going to work, but maybe we got to double our webinar fee in order to get some funding. Well, we'll see what happens. Anyway, we're doing this to help everybody for free, right? Because we're nice guys. So I'm going to turn it over to Martin to see if he has any questions that came up from our audience. And you're free to ask questions over Zoom if you're registered, or if you're on Facebook. You can't, post your questions on our platform, but you could certainly post it on Facebook. Or if you don't have questions, if you want to post a comment, that's fine too. You're welcome to do that. So Martin, are you finished eating your chocolate, and are you ready to ask the questions?
Yes, Lance, the chocolate was excellent.
Oh, what kind of chocolate did you have?
Only the best, Ghirardelli.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's good.
Anyway, we've got some really good questions here that have come in from our attendees on the webinar. So let me hit them and get them to you right now. The first one here is, where do you send your materials to be tested for hazardous material? Good question.
Oh, okay. You don't send it to that guy in the picture here. That guy is already a worker. He's a hazmat contractor. So what you do is you look for environmental consultants. Okay, you do a internet search, environmental consultants, and companies will come up that either they're a consultant themselves and they can write specs for remediation. They might have a lab. If they don't, they can refer you to a lab for testing. So that's a very good question. One of the guys that I use, his name is Mark Moranaka, and he's actually an instructor. He teaches contractors, architects, engineers, and other people on hazmat and environmental hazards and all that. So he's a good guy. He's a consultant that has contacts to a laboratory. There's also Air Care International, and those are good friends of mine. I network with them all the time. When I got my own questions about hazmat stuff, I call them up and say, hey, I have this question, can you help me? And then, vice versa, if they have questions on building in general and construction and building issues, they network with me, contact me. So if you need more information on that, if you get stuck, let us know. I think there's another company called Analytical Laboratories or something. Because when I work on construction projects, we have to send samples for testing, asbestos, lead paint, mold, and all that. So I don't handle the transmissions myself because there's a protocol. You can't just scrape the material and drive it down to the laboratory yourself. And there has to be full documentation. Who actually took the material, when, where did they put it? They put it in a bag. You have to mark the bag. Who's the carrier over to the laboratory, and they sign off and all that. There's a whole strict protocol for that. But if you get stuck, let us know, and we can help.
Okay, thanks, Lance. The next question we have from one of our webinar attendees here is actually, it looks like 3 questions. First part of it is, how do you or your contractor contain all the dust that travels through the air when you are grinding, jackhammering, and saw cutting, all the, et cetera, et cetera. Then the next part is also, how is this controlled in a fully occupied property or building? And the third part of that question is, the contractor is supposed to vacuum up all the dust from the floor areas daily. Is that correct?
Okay, so let's take the first question. The first question, the contractors grinding concrete and all that, they're supposed to mitigate the dust. Now, one way to do it is there's special grinders, okay, that have a vacuum hose attached to it. So when they start grinding, okay, their debris, the material ends up being vacuumed. Okay, so they're supposed to do that, but sometimes you can't. So a lot of times you may have to wet down the area, spray it with water or some kind of mist and all that. In some cases, you have to build a containment area, and it's fully contained, and they work in that area so no dust ends up flying around. Now, how do you prevent, you have a high-rise building, how do you prevent like dust from flying around? Sometimes if they're working on a lower floor, they have to put up, those black netting that you see at construction sites for dust mitigation. So, like dust screens and all that. So, but you can't put up a dust screen 40 stories high. So when they're on the rig, they have to create some kind of enclosure on the rig and use the vacuum cleaner and other accessories like that to contain the dust and the debris. I'm sorry, I forgot what the second question was. If they ask 3 questions, we got to charge them for the second and third question. The first one's free, but okay. So
Yeah,
can you repeat the second?
One, the second part here was also, how is this controlled in a fully occupied property or building? You
okay. Yeah, thanks. So a fully occupied unit, let's say, they go into one unit. It's sort of like doing cast iron pipe replacement or paint mitigation or whatever. They have to use containment method. And the containment is, you have these plastic sheets that go from the floor to the ceiling, and it's sealed with special tape. So basically, it's a plastic containment area. So and they have, how do you get in? Well, you remove the tape, or there's the more expensive ones where we have like a zipper, and you go and walk into the area and zip it up. So when you walk into the containment area, you zip it up. Only the workers in that area are exposed, and they're wearing their proper PPE with suits and all that. So the rest of the area in the room, it's not getting dust on it, not getting exposed. So it's a total containment area, sort of like when you go to a hospital and the person is contained in all this clear plastic. It's sort of similar to that. And then the third question is dust. So you have a contractor working in your unit, and he's making a lot of dust. He's not supposed to just leave the area without cleaning up. Now, if he comes with a broom and sweeps up the dust, okay, that's better than nothing, but there's still fine particles of dust there. He needs to vacuum up the dust and use a wet mop and clean it up. Okay, so there's certain protocol. So if you're watching a contractor and they're not doing that, you're gonna have to say, hey, buddy, you got to do a better job. Or some companies that I work with, okay, for cast iron drain piping. After the contractor leaves that day, they bring in their cleaning crew, and they clean, they mop it, they use wet rags, and everything is clean. It's sort of like when you're in a hotel and you go out for the whole day, you come back and your unit's clean, hopefully. That's how it is. So if the contractor doesn't do that, I mean, if they clean it on their own and they do a good job, fine. If they don't, they need to bring in a cleaning crew and clean up the right way. Now, sometimes it doesn't make sense to clean every day. They're going to clean at the end of the job, but you don't want a contractor coming into your domain, your unit where you live, and creating a mess and not cleaning it up. So in all my specifications and protocol for construction work, I got paragraphs of cleaning, what to do. You can't leave your tools lying around and all that kind of stuff. So I actually like that 3-part question. I gotta eat 3 chocolates now after that.
Okay, well, we got a few more questions if you're
Yeah,
still
let's go.
Okay, this next one says, I'm a building manager for several older apartment and condo buildings. What things should I be doing so that I do not get in trouble with the building materials you mentioned?
Okay, so you need to be aware that your building possibly and most likely has lead paint and asbestos. Okay, be aware. If you're really concerned, have it tested. If you're not too concerned, just be concerned that if you're going to do any construction work, okay, on the outside of the building, spalling repair, repainting and all that, part of the prep of painting is you sand the wall. So if there's lead paint, it's your responsibility as the owner to let the contractor know. Okay, it's also the contractor's responsibility to bring it up with you, but a lot of times they don't want to deal with it, right? Owners don't want to deal with it because it costs more money. If the painter is not licensed as a hazmat contractor, he's not, going to go in and want to touch the paint, right? He can get fined from EPA. So there's degrees of hazardous paint. Yeah, there's lead containing paint, and there's paint that has a lot of lead in it, and there's different percentages of lead. So some percentages are so low that you don't need to do much hazmat, but then some percentages are higher, and then you got to do full remediation. Okay, so that's what needs to be done. The other thing is, now the interior of your building, you're going to be doing repair work if there's damages. So you just have to be aware of asbestos in the ceiling, in the drywall, or on your floor tile if it's 9x9. The mastic also may have asbestos, not only the tile itself. And then, so if you're going to have work done, you better make sure that you have testing done of the product, and then the contractor that you hire follows the remediation methods, because especially if the tenant's still living in the unit. If the tenant's living in the unit and they're exposed to hazardous materials and debris stuff, you may be in for a lawsuit if they end up getting sick. Okay, so good question. Just be aware.
Thank you, Lance. Next question here, are workers of a condo building subject to the same rules that hired contractors need to follow?
Okay, so OSHA is the jurisdiction that governs construction workers or employees. If your condo building hires employees or has employees working, okay, and they're not an outside contractor, guess what? You still have to follow the OSHA requirements. The OSHA law pertains to any employee that's doing any kind of construction work or similar type work. It doesn't matter if it's not an outside contractor. Most people think that OSHA only governs, new construction or contractors, general contractors, sub, and they're not involved in employees that are doing any kind of work. So that's a fallacy. Employees, maintenance people that work in a condo, that work at a golf course, that work in a hotel, any kind of building, a shopping center, the maintenance employees that do repair work, they're all covered under the OSHA jurisdiction. So many people don't know that. They think, oh, we're a private shopping center. We're not building a new building in Kakako, so we don't have to follow the OSHA regulations. No, that's totally wrong. If you don't believe that, call up OSHA yourself and ask them the question, and they'll tell you exactly what I'm telling you. So, yeah, good. We got any other questions?
Good answer. Yep, got a couple more, and then we get a few more minutes here, I think. In a condo building built in 1972, I've been on the board for 5 years, and we have never discussed lead paint or asbestos. What should we be talking about, especially if the materials are inside the unit?
Well, like I mentioned before to the person that was asking about an apartment building, the same thing applies. It doesn't matter if it's a condo building or an apartment building or an office building or shopping center. Everything I mentioned is exactly the same. You still need to be aware. Now, if the board never discussed it before, I would say you might need to bring it up and just say, hey, guys, I attended this webinar and this building expert was telling me about older buildings having lead paint, asbestos. I think we should be aware of it. And the next time we do any construction work, we need to follow the right protocol. So that's just, doing the right thing, because you never know. You could get dragged into litigation if you didn't take the right steps. Also in a condo, if unit owners are doing renovation on their own, inside their own unit, the board can't say, well, it's your own unit, you're responsible, so we can't tell you what to do, whatever, just get the work done. No, you have to take responsibility and notify these people who are applying and saying, if you don't have any architecture design guidelines, I would say you better put some together. And when somebody applies for renovation, they read the guidelines, and there's a paragraphs about hazardous materials that they're responsible. Or what you do in general is just say, our building was built prior to 1977, 78. In that situation, buildings built prior to those dates may contain lead paint and asbestos. Be aware, have your contractor be aware, test before you do anything and all that stuff. Okay, so you got to go take a little more steps to attain where you need to be as a board, because if you're on the board, you could be liable, not only for giving incorrect information, but even by omission, because a unit owner could say, oh, the board never told me anything about lead paint or asbestos, and I just went about and did what I needed to do and renovate my unit. Okay? But if they don't know, like let's say they're cutting drywall out and it's asbestos containing material, and the contractor just goes to your building trash can and throws that stuff in, guess what? $10,000, $25,000 fine, right? You have to take these lead paint, asbestos material to a separate landfill that's special. Okay, so you got to be careful.
Sounds good, Lance. Thanks, yeah. We get one more. We got a mold question, so I got to make sure I get this one into you. So if a condo unit has mold from the next door neighbor water leak, is it really the unit owner's responsibility to remove, Says I am fighting with my condo board over this issue. The board is telling me I have to remove the mold.
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, let's say you're in a unit and then your unit above has a flood and then there's mold growing in your unit. Okay, the answer is it's your unit. You're responsible, right? You're first responsible. If the guy above or your condo board doesn't do anything, you're stuck, okay? Because it's your unit. But is it your liability? Did you cause the problem? No. So you contact your insurance company. Your insurance company can contact the either contact a contractor to fix your unit, okay, and subrogate. That means go after the primary cause, which is a unit above, and contact their insurance company. If they don't have any insurance, then they're going to have to sue the unit owner if it's caused by a unit owner problem. If it's a common area problem, that becomes a condo board, condo association issue, then you have to go after that. So there could be a number of parties and players involved, and it really gets confusing. Everybody's pointing their finger and, oh, no, it's not us, it's the other guy. You're supposed to be responsible. So what you got to do is say, hey, I didn't cause the problem. The guy upstairs caused the problem. And then sometimes the association board would say, well, you go sue that unit owner. We're not responsible. So the best thing is to find out all the facts, what the cause is, and really pursue it. Sometimes I'm working on some cases that are 2 to 3 years old. They never got resolved yet. And it's silly. It's ridiculous. But that's what happens in the real world of mold claims, water leak claims, insurance companies and contractors and condo boards. But I know we're a little over, but want to make sure that we don't have any other questions or anybody posted on Facebook, because that's all right if we're over, over time. I'm just going to charge extra.
No, Lance, you did a good job today on hazardous materials and the Q&A, and that's all that I see on either Facebook side or Zoom side. So good job as usual. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And on behalf of Martin and myself and Ask the Building Expert series provided by the National Building Expert and Construction Management Inspection, we thank you for attending. It's always good to see you guys on board with us. And please, you're welcome to attend the next webinar or webinars. And if you missed, go to our website, askbuildingexpert.now.site, and then watch any of the previous videos on demand. There's a lot of information there. So maybe sit back, get some chocolate, get some popcorn, and enjoy the previous webinar. So once again, thank you very much, and we'll see you at the next one. Aloha.